So thanks, Debbie, for jumping in, and really appreciate it. Debbie Brey, Agile, Community of Excellence leader, the Boeing Company, and I'm going to present Agile at Boeing. Thanks, Debbie.
All right, thank you. You caught me after only 1 cup of coffee, so we'll take it for what it is today. So I just wanted to start a little bit and tell you a little bit about myself. I graduated from the University of Minnesota with a Bachelor of Computer Science, and I started at Boeing right out of college. Been there ever since. I've had a lot of opportunities in my 35-year career, and I've never been bored. My first job would be my first experience with waterfall. And it was on a then black project called the Advanced Tactical Fighter that later became the F-22. And early on, I started working on the software for the cockpit displays and controls, and I was handed a document that was over a year old, and I was told to build the displays and controls described within it, even though the design had evolved beyond that. That didn't really sit very well with me. Later, I joined the team that was designing the cockpit displays, and we decided to do things differently. We were working with very small batch sizes of the displays, and we're truly experimenting with what might or might not work. Every 6 to 9 months, we would bring in customer pilots, taught them the new controls and displays, had them fly the simulator, and provide feedback. At times, we even made changes while they were sitting in the cockpit. So the simulator was the proof that the product would work, and this was a very agile approach. Felt much better and more rewarding than my previous experience. I heard about Agile in late 2006 as a way to improve software productivity. And the crazy thing about me is that as soon as I hear about something, I like to read all the information I can about it. So it was Thanksgiving break. I went on the internet. Scott Ambler had a full website about Agile modeling, which was great. And I even encountered this Agile practice called Scrum. And I came back the following Monday and I asked my team if they'd like to try this new approach. And so begins the tale of Agile at Boeing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe to you kind of where we've come from, where we've been, and then talk about our plans for the future. And I think this is really relevant, and I've heard a lot of people talk about the culture that goes along with it, and the fact that people are a critical part of any data or digital transformation and modeling as well. And so I think that's where the relevance of this talk comes in this conference. So picture now a large 105-year-old manufacturing company called Boeing. We have a long history with learning and implementing lean in the factory. And in about 2007, right at the same time we were introducing Agile, a new initiative called Lean Plus began to emerge. And it was an attempt to move lean out of the factory. There was a lot of effort put into the rollout. However, it didn't really meet the mark as the message was still very production related. So many people probably got it, but a lot of people didn't. And so it became more of a manager incentivized, do a lean project, show your improvements, and then forget about it. So it was a push, it was mandatory, but it did have great sponsorship. At about that same time in our history, we started with Agile. And because we were a manufacturing company, Boeing didn't really see themselves as a software company or value software engineering. So I shared my learning about Agile with my team. We quickly saw improvements on how we were working together and the productivity that we had. I launched a community of practice and connected in with other areas of Boeing who had already started learning about Agile. And we launched an initiative to use Agile for our software teams in Boeing Defense. And we decided to call it the Boeing Agile Software Process, which was really just Scrum with a few additional roles and some descriptions about how you could use it in how you could use Agile and how you could use it with government contracts. It didn't address the cultural or transformational aspect of Agile and was basically seen as a practice or a process, and it only needed to be learned by software engineers. So by 2008, we had run a bunch of pilots, including my own team on F-22. We had a big rollout campaign, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner. We had posters, we had books, we had badge extenders, and just that really big rollout of a new process that we were going to use. And in fact, we were given targets to roll this out to all of the software engineering organizations in BDS. However, being that we were a manufacturing company and Lean Plus had rolled out just prior to this, a lot of times we had to do stealth Agile underneath the guise of Lean Plus. In 2009, my team achieved a first-time quality delivery of the F-22 training system to Langley Air Force Base. And because we were able to share an Agile success on a large program of record, it finally helped us to get out from behind Lean Plus. But there were still challenges. We continued to drive the adoption of Agile to meet our targets, but there still wasn't that acknowledgement of the transformational change. And also, managers and leaders did not see this as something that they needed to learn. It was something that the teams did. So we still had big upfront requirements and design. These technical practices that you see here on the slide as well weren't introduced until 2011, and even then they were lightly implemented across the programs. Agile was a process, not a way of working. Well, in 2011, our team won the Boeing Replication Award for showing that we could take that same process and apply it across a diverse set of programs. We collected metrics and demonstrated increased productivity, quality, throughput, cost savings, cost avoidance at different levels and in different product contexts and organizational contexts. By 2012, we had 60% of the software teams using Agile, but besides those measures that we had collected above, we really didn't know how well we were doing or how broadly Agile had been applied. By 2013, then, we developed a maturity metric so that we could see how the teams were doing, and it was based on the process. Are you doing daily stand-ups? Are you doing demos? Those kinds of things. And we started to see kind of trends and improvements in those areas. But it was really challenging for us to gather the information and to consolidate it across all of these diverse programs because nobody was tracking their metrics in the same way. On our F-22 program, we continued to innovate with our Agile approach. We learned from other government programs and connected to industry teams that were starting to use Agile outside of software. I always felt that implementing Agile in software only wasn't really applying that systems thinking approach. We made a lot of changes to the product and our organization as we made these advances. So we had to adjust our product architecture to allow us to make smaller independent changes and test and validate them. We automated our build processes and taught our software engineers how to manage their own configuration, which removed what we used to call the build team. And I know that there's still a bunch of them out there. We had test engineers on our Agile teams to test the product daily when necessary. We hadn't quite gotten to automation yet, and it was challenging because our product was based in Ada, which was a language that wasn't really supported by the tools vendors. Eventually, we were able to provide our users with previews of what we were working on overnight, and get their feedback before we finalize the product. And we even pulled our systems engineers into our Agile teams and embedded them. So we were making progress in some areas, and we were showing these great metrics. And there's always that adage, be careful what you measure. So we had started addressing Agile outside of software organizations. We finally got to 85% of those software programs. Our maturity metrics were on the rise. Surely we had proven that Agile was a process, a valuable process for software. And we did so well that the VP of software engineering that had sponsored the initiative decided we were done. We had Agile embedded in the culture. We no longer needed to staff the work. We no longer needed continuous learning. Everything could sustain itself. And so our funding was cut and the core team moved on. Hence the Agile Dark Ages. This was about a 2+ year period. Agile was still practiced in many software areas, but the sponsors felt that it could continue on its own. And we did experience a lot of backsliding in terms of the improvements that we'd seen over time. So at this point, I decided to go back to grassroots and started a new community of practice. And I got like 100 members after the first week and 1,000 members before the end of the first year, which is, for grassroots, is not too bad. A lot of people were still interested in Agile, and they knew of its value, so we kept moving forward a little bit. 2016, we turned 100 years old, and we had some great celebrations talking about the future. And internally, we were developing plans for our digital transformation that would take us into the next century. That included both the infrastructure and business process changes required in order to make it happen. So our digital transformation was then called the Second Century Enterprise Systems, and it became a company-wide effort, and it was led by our then CIO, Ted Colbert. So utilizing approach that we learned from Pivotal Labs, we established a digital transformation environment, or DTE, that was targeted to modernize our IT software development. It was heavily based in extreme programming, and it included an immersive experience opportunity where teams were brought into a lab environment. They were given pairing stations. They were provided with the new digital tools for development. The social environment was there. Finally, we were addressing the transformation aspect of it. Awesome. In that lab, teams thrived and achieved great productivity improvements. However, for many, nothing was addressed in the home environment. And so when they left the lab, they didn't achieve the same improvements. And that's the challenge. A year or so later, we had a larger digital transformation effort to really go after those business processes, to start to develop the infrastructure. And I was brought in to help with a scaled Agile transformation because that organization was not just doing software, it was enterprise architecture, it was business architecture, it was business process redesign, and also bringing in a couple of large COTS products and configuring them. So they felt they needed a different approach than what the lab environment was doing. And the desire was to have Agile top to bottom, and we leveraged the Scaled Agile framework to do that. That was about 2,000 people at the time when I started, as well as our large suppliers that were brought on as partners. We had principles that included holistic business process transformation, and it included utilizing Agile practices. The transformation effort took a lot of effort, training. We brought in coaches from IBM while we were training our own internal coaches. We established a training program for SAFE, and we really worked with organizational leaders to attempt to transform that system of work. During that time, we gained great alignment across this large organization. Finally, we started seeing some collaboration across the three major infrastructure products that were being brought in. We would have alignment meetings. We would make sure that our priorities were connected to one another. And there were still challenges because people outside of that environment didn't really understand what we were doing and had the challenge of trying to understand how we were working in that collaborative nature. If you're interested, I did end up sharing that story at the 2019 SAFE Summit, where I explained that we had 18 Agile release trains and basically had to supersize SAFE. You can find that recording out on Vimeo. At about the same time that we were doing that, a Boeing aircraft program wanted to operate and worked differently, and I convinced them that SAFE would be a good starting approach based on their scale. Again, the product had a lot of complexity, and Boeing's family of aircraft were based on a diffuse architecture, not object-oriented. And in the end, that would limit the overall impact of agility. It was really challenging to change the mindset of this organization where they were not building software at all, but they were building an airplane and designing an airplane. But the program leaders were fully on board, fully engaged, and provided a great environment and an understanding of the cultural change that was needed when changing the system of work. Model-based engineering was a cornerstone to this program, and pairing that with Agile brought about great promise for our future. So with these two transformations going on, the larger transformations, the information got up to our executive committee, and finally we were able to get back where we established a center of excellence for Agile within our enterprise program management organization. And the attempt there was to show that Agile was not simply about software. So we were trying to bring it up and out and also make it so that we could go global and support our company globally. So we scoped the Center of Excellence and we wanted to bring in the 13 years at that point of time of experience that we had from Boeing. It was a kind of a tough time to do a startup in the company, but in September of 2019, we had enough infrastructure developed, and we held a global Follow the Sun showcase, and which for our Center of Excellence, which we actually, as you can see in the slide here, we named the Be Agile Center of Excellence to emphasize the culture piece of Agile, which was one of the failings that we had from our previous implementations. We had over 1,000 people attend our kickoff, and everyone was excited really to hear that Agile was being supported. During that first year, we connected our coaches and SAFE program consultants and piloted an Agile Coaching Academy in order to grow our internal coaching competency, knowing that from the State of Agile report, that was one of the top 5 things that people saw as improving the outcomes on their transformation. We continue to increase the availability of SAFE training within the company as a companion to basic Agile training that we started to redevelop and really bring in the mindset, values, principles, and emphasize the culture. So this is just a graphic of what I've just described to you in terms of our history. The top is really what was happening in the industry. The bottom is really what happened at Boeing. And I think the pivotal thing for getting the Agile Center of Excellence stood up, not only those 2 large programs, but also some of these Harvard Business Review articles where they were really talking about embracing Agile at scale, and even getting it up to the C-suite. So there were some pivotal changes there. Now, there are still a lot of factors in place that are limiting our business agility, and these are things that the Center of Excellence is planning on addressing going forward. So I'll just bring them up first, and then I'll talk about how we're addressing them. So first of all, our leaders seemed to always be very busy, never had time to take training, never had time to really understand what it was that they needed to contribute to the overall transformation. And this was not to their discredit, but to our discredit for not starting there. And we need to get leaders at all levels of the company to understand how to leverage this mindset and continue learning, especially as we're evolving our manufacturing company into that digital age. In order to achieve this goal, we have to also increase the availability of internal Agile coaches and instructors and recognize their value in our transformation. We need to address the general competency around Agile and Lean, and it has to be part of our organizational ecosystem. And I've heard that reflected in several presentations throughout the conference this week. So it's good to hear that others are seeing the same thing. Agile has to be understood by all, even if it's not implemented everywhere. And we have even attempted to use Agile in the right context on the factory floor, and I think that's been fairly successful. Dedicated people to Agile teams. We can't have an Agile team that is basically only part-time people. Dedicating to a team, making sure that you can focus and finish is a really important aspect of agility. We need to move away from this project-based mindset, and we need to get to that product-based mindset. And I think that the digital thread is really going to help with that, because we need to be looking at that thread of our products throughout their life cycle continuously. We always default to our traditional ways of working, and so we need to find a way to make sure that there are alternative ways of working that are identified, and that we use our critical and systems thinking to apply those. So our future plans in our focus is really the concept of achieving business agility, not just for the sake of being agile. If COVID and the current environment has taught us one thing, it's that even the best plans can be made unachievable, and sometimes the environment changes very quickly. So how quickly can we adapt in this environment? How can we deliberately design and improve culture, which is something that we usually find challenging to describe or even see. We know companies like Tesla, SpaceX, Google, Amazon, they grew up in the digital age, and they're more able to move quickly and respond to change. How can we achieve that in that same native agility in a company that's 500 or 105 years old, not 500? So technology and all that I've heard at this conference regarding DevSecOps, data, MBSE, it will only get us so far. We have to address the people, social, and cultural aspects of how these technologies will get adopted and how we'll work together. So the first step is to acknowledge that we've learned what we've learned about Agile and recognize there are some things we need to unlearn. Not only about our traditional way of working, but also about how we brought Agile in as a process. So as I shared, we named the Center of Excellence Be Agile in order to emphasize the shift from implementing practices to one where we were truly changing the system of work. And this is an essential part of our strategy. You can't simply add practices to your existing mindset and hope to get the value out of the new approach. You have to change the system. And this applies with digital as well. Boeing has defined our own Agile mindset, values, and principles that are simplified from the original manifesto and described in a way that anyone in the company should be able to relate to and achieve value from using as a baseline to start their own transformation and way of working. And it all starts with people. So our transformation strategy has 4 principles. Leaders go first, start with why, empower the how, and focus on outcomes. And I'll go through each one of these. So leaders go first. Several of the limiting factors we learned from our previous attempts at Agile revolve around leaders and their lack of knowledge about their role in the cultural changes required to achieve business agility. And Boeing's not alone in this. In the 2021 State of Agile report, industry report, it included 4 leadership-related barriers in the top 6 challenges identified in Agile adoption and scaling. And these have been consistent over the past several years. To address this, we need our leaders to learn about their role in the transformation, learn what Agile is and what it's not, and give them different tools to use when working in organizations that utilize an Agile model. There are many organizations that have adopted Agile practices, but managing those products and programs using traditional management systems. So this clash of techniques has resulted in limiting agility, and in some cases, the operational cost increases because we have 2 disparate systems that don't align with one another. Why do leaders need to go first? Well, transformational leaders must provide the vision for the change. They need to challenge others to adapt their way of working and coach others in how to enable the change. And this can't be done if leaders don't have the competency or the knowledge. Therefore, the leadership team should be the first to adopt the new ways of working. So we recently experienced this in one of our organizations where they have a leadership team that operates as an Agile team. They have a backlog of work that they need to accomplish and enable the organization to operate. They plan with the organization using Agile techniques. They reflect with the organization to identify where improvements are needed. And this is a model that we will embed in our approach going forward. The vision for the change needs to be communicated over and over and over again. And it must also be observed by others in the behaviors of our leaders. So, so we need to work on not just what we say, but what we do. And we also need to enable that culture where people feel psychologically safe to bring their self to work, their whole self, where they're trusted to learn for themselves, where they're empowered to challenge the status quo, where diversity of opinion is heard and respected, where risks and bad news are welcomed and not hushed, where emergence is understood and embraced rather than forced to align to a predicted schedule, where decision-making is moved to where the information exists and transparency is supported for all decisions, and where people feel supported and leaders provide coaching. So
Debbie, just before I'm going to jump in here right a minute. We've got about 4 minutes left and so
okay.
If you want to entertain a question or two, we might just let you know we've got a few minutes left.
Absolutely. That's fine. I will just skip forward. We talk about team autonomy, value stream mapping, and essentially never give up. My get off the stage is you may be on an Agile journey yourself, and I encourage you to be curious about some of the ideas I presented here and see if you can avoid any of the challenges that I shared. However, if you've taken one thing away from what I shared, it should be that you need to use your critical thinking to find your own path based on an understanding of complexity and context. Don't just copy what someone else has done, and be relentless in your pursuit for better. So, any questions?
All right, let me check the questions here real quick. All right, I have a couple questions here for you. You mentioned early in your presentation, Debbie, that Agile was found, and you were kind of like, you planted that seed, you nurtured it, it grew within the company, and now it's kind of a mainstay of how we do business. And you know, the question I have for you is what's next? I mean, this is a constantly evolutionary concept of how do we do things better, and there are still some other methodologies that are still out there that are utilized. So where are we going? If you could, you know, polish up that crystal ball and take a look, where are we going? Is Agile going to be here forever, or what's coming up next?
I certainly hope that in a couple of years we're not really talking about it, that we're just doing it. But the recognition is that there's a set of different ways of working that we need to be able to embrace, and that's where our critical thinking and systems thinking come in. So is lean the right approach? Is Agile the right approach? Is there a blend that's the right approach? What we need to do is we need to look at our context, understand, are we at the edge of chaos? Are we in complexity? Are we doing something simple? And adjust the way that we're working to do it. So what we hope to do is develop an ecosystem of ways of working and give people the tools to make decisions about which way will work for them, and then set this up more as a continuous improvement model versus a do this and then it'll be good, right? So we know that whatever we come up with today is not going to be what will take us to tomorrow. And so we need to have that continuous learning culture and all the things that I talked about on this slide.
Yeah.
You know, just make sure that we're continuously learning and bringing in whatever approach will work best.
Fabulous. Hey, thank you, Debbie. That's fascinating. It's good to have a level set on Agile and understand that it's a journey. We're actually evolving with Agile, taking an Agile approach to our continuous improvement. So thank you very much. Great job. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Debbie, thanks so much for stepping in and picking up the slot. Really appreciate that. Also, I know you've been my Agile coach, and I've taken classes from you on the journey. And I think the importance of story and journey and what we learn and sharing that back is so powerful. So really, really appreciate it, and thanks.
No problem.
Right.